All right, I guess we should get started, and we'll see who else joins. Again, Ellie Backman here, Chabad in College Park. Today we are beginning Hilchos Milah, the laws of circumcision. Rambam Sefer Alva. We finished Hilchos Brachos yesterday, and now we're going to Hilchos Milah. Hilchos Milah is interestingly placed in Sefer Ahava, which is the book of love of a relationship, which had to do with tefillah and had to do with brachos and all that. But here it's the last one of the Sefer because Milah ultimately represents that relationship which we have with Hashem, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hilchos Milah, the Rambam begins mitzvahs aseh achas. There's one positive command. Vehi lomul hazacharim b'yom shmini, to circumcise your male children on the 8th day. Uvir mitzvah zuba prakam elu, and the mitzvah will be explained in the following chapters. So again, all the next couple of chapters are all based on the one mitzvah aseh, the positive command to do and to give your 8-day-old child a bris milah. Perek Rishon, the first chapter. Milah mitzvah aseh shechayav ala kares. Milah is a positive commandment, and if you do not fulfill it, you are obligated to, punishable by karet. Karet means that you'll have a premature death at the hand of Hashem, that you won't live out your years. Now, technically speaking, the Alter Rebbe and Tanya discusses at length, and without running off too much of a tangent, it doesn't really seem to play itself out these days. It was back in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Our relationship with Hashem was much more sensitive, and certain mitzvot would kind of uproot that relationship. Today, we're not in that sensitive of a level, so we perhaps don't have the same uprooting of a mitzvah like kares might have, but ultimately, the punishment for mitzvahs aseh of kares is kares. Shenamar, like it says in the pasuk, va'aral zachar shelo yimol b'sar lasai, and any uncircumcised male who did not circumcise his flesh, v'nechatza nefesh hahi me'ameha, and that soul will be cut off. Karet means literally cut off, will be cut off from its people. And the Rambam continues, we're in halacha 1, mitzvahs ala av lamolos benoi. The mitzvah is on the father to circumcise his child, and on a master to circumcise his slaves. You lead bias and mikdas kesef. The pasuk, the verse tells us in Bereshit that those born to the house, or those who are acquired through money, are also obligated to be given a brit milah. And the Rambam will discuss that at length in the next couple of pages. If the father or the master did not give their child or their servant a bris milah, they have forfeited, if you wish, this opportunity to do a mitzvah aseh, a positive command. But they are not obligated, they are not punished with kares. Because this punishment of kares is only for the individual who is uncircumcised himself, not his father. And a bezdin, the community rabbis have an obligation to step in and circumcise a child or a servant in the proper time, as we'll learn soon what that means. They're not allowed to leave an uncircumcised child in amongst Bnei Yisrael or amongst their slaves and servants. Halacha beis. You're not allowed to circumcise a person's child without his knowledge. Unless the person has gone ahead, the father has not circumcised a child, which at that point, Bezdin can do it even against the father's will. If for some reason Bezdin, the court, the rabbinic court of the time, was not aware, and this child grew up, when he grows up, this mitzvah of bris milah now becomes his mitzvah. When he's a child, he's not obligated in the mitzvah because he's a child. His father is. When his father doesn't do it, the bezdin has to step in. The local rabbinic court has to step in. But if neither of them did it and the child grows up, at that point it becomes his obligation. And the Rambam continues, and every single day which goes on, which passes, and he has, since he grew older, since he's an adult now, and he has not circumcised himself, he has forfeited his mitzvahs, the opportunity to do bris milah. But the Rambam continues, he is not obligated or punishable by karet, like we said at the beginning, unless he passes away and intentionally did not do a bris milah. So it's an interesting phenomenon. The Rambam tells you that you're punished by karet if you don't give yourself a brit milah. But technically speaking, you can do a brit milah up until the day you die. So karet never really stepped in our physical life in this scenario, because until he dies, he's not chayav karet. And obviously, once he dies, karet is not going to apply. Gimel, the third mitzvah. Whether it's a slave who was born to as the property of a Jewish owner, or one who was bought from the Gentiles. In other words, if you own the mother as a servant and she gave birth, or if you bought the child as a slave. Now the Rambam is going to spend a couple of halachot explaining the laws of a slave regarding Brit Milah. Again, these halachas will be dealt with more in the laws of slaves, of whether it applies today, not apply, how do you acquire, do you acquire, and clearly it's against the law today in America, etc. But we're going to go through the halachas as the Rambam puts them down here. Chayav harav lamalei, said the master is obligated to give a brit milah uncircumcised. Elishalit by nibul lishmona, one who is born to his household gets the brit milah when he's 8 days old. Umikdat kesav nibul b'yom shel nokach, and someone who is bought is technically obligated the day that the child or the slave is bought. Even if you buy a 1-day-old infant, technically the Rambam says, since at that moment you acquire, it's not part of the law of the 8 days you should wait, and they're chayiv and they're obligated right away bris milah. Now the Rambam continues more about this in Halach of Dalet 4. Yesh miknas kesef shenimu lishmayna, yesh libai shenimu b'yom shenola. It's going to get a little complicated. Let's try our best here. That there's some slaves who are acquired who will wait 8 days, and there's some slaves who were born to your household who will actually give it on the day that they're born. Kate said, what does this mean? If the person bought a maid and she bought together the rights to her child sort of separately, in other words, he says, I'm acquiring a maid, but I know you're pregnant, or you will become pregnant, and I want to acquire the rights to your children separately. That child, when he's born, is considered born to your household, and therefore has to wait 8 days. Even though he stipulated that I'm buying the fetus, the child, separately, so seemingly you're buying it. And we said before that when you buy it, it's on the day right away that you're obligated, and not the 8th day. Here it's different. Since he acquired the mother before the child was born, he becomes as if he was born to the household, even though there were 2 separate stipulations and acquisitions at play. Hey, if you bought a maidservant for her offspring, or you bought a maid on condition that this maid would not go through the process of becoming an eved, which becoming an eved, technically a maid or a slave, the Rambam will detail all this later on, becomes partially accepting of Jewish law. They go through a process similar to conversion, but this one was stipulated that she would not go through this process. At that point, the child born to this maid will be given a circumcision on the day the child is born. For this child is considered as if it was born on, rather not born, but bought on their own, and a bought child, a bought eved, a bought slave, requires bris milah immediately on the day it's acquired. And if you purchase today, since the mother is not considered a shivcha, a maidservant for a Jewish home, because we didn't buy the mother, you only bought the offspring, or the mother refused to go through the process of becoming a part of a Jewish maidservant. So the mother is in one situation. The child is then considered as if he was born, as if it was born, and therefore it's obligated on that day. The only time that the child can be considered born to the house is if the mother is Jewish or if the maidservant has begun the process of becoming Jewish. Here, neither of those apply. But if the mother, the Rambam says, does go to the mikveh and begins the process after the child was born, then the child will get it on the 8th day, because then the mother is now a maidservant of a Jewish home, and the child being born to this mother, therefore also requires that. Vav 6, Rambam continues, if you acquired an adult slave from a non-Jew, in other words, out on the street, Ratza Evid Lamul, and if the slave does not, rather, the slave does not want to be circumcised. You wait a year and you try to convince. Yes, okay, and also longer than a year, you're not allowed to keep him. So if he says, I don't want to do it, you spend a year and you try to convince him. If he says at the end of the year, I still don't want to do it, you resell him to where you bought him from, back to another sale, and he has to go off. But if you condition at the beginning, before he was bought, the slave stipulated, I will let you buy me on condition you do not circumcise me. Then you're allowed to keep him even though he doesn't have circumcision, because he was bought with that condition at play. The Rambam says, but in order to be part of the Jewish community in that kind of a relationship, he has to do what's called the ger toshav, or it's translated as like a resident alien. And we'll learn more about these halachos later on. In Hilchos Avodas Kechavim, later on, the Rambam will talk about it. These are non-Jews who live in Israel, accept the 7 Noahide laws, but do not accept the process of beginning their conversion to become a Jew. So therefore, they've accepted the law of the land, they've accepted God, and all the rest of the 7 Noahide laws. So that's why the Rambam says, so if he was stipulated he will not be circumcised, he could remain, but he has to be like a ger toshav, and therefore he has to accept upon himself the 7 Noahide laws. But if he did not accept upon the 7 Noahide laws, he will be put to death immediately. This discussion will really find itself more at the very end of the Rambam when we discuss the laws of 7 Noahide laws, and when someone may be put to death for them, when not put to death for them. The Kesef Mishnah, one of the commentators right here, kind of says the Rambam is implying that we should use this to explain to them how important it is that they should accept the 7 Noahide laws if they're going to remain within the Jewish community. But that will just be discussed a little bit more then, about when is someone actually obligated in the 7 Noahide laws, when it's punishable by X punishment or death punishment, etc. Now the Rambam makes a general statement. The only time you're allowed to accept these ger toshav, this particular unique scenario of an individual who's quasi in the community, accepts the 7 Noahide laws, etc., is only during the time that the Yovel Noheg, the time that the Jubilee year would be in effect, and that has a lot of effects on laws of slaves, because the slaves go free in the 50th year, return the owners, etc. And again, those laws will be discussed later in the laws regarding them more at length. Here we're talking about Bris Milah, and the Rambam is just referencing it where needed. Zion 7. Now we go to a more regular case. Gerish Shenichnas Lekal Yisrael, a convert who wants to convert and become Jewish. Chayav Milah Tchila, before he finishes conversion process, part of the process is to have a Brit Milah if he's a male, to have a circumcision. What if he had a circumcision when he was non-Jewish? The day that he goes through the process, he will have to do what's called hatafas dam. Hatafas dam is that they just take a small drop of blood, which is symbolic. They can't do a Brit Milah because circumcision, because he was already circumcised. So this is a symbolic Brit Milah, and by that drop of blood, and saying the blessing, and be that, it would be as if he's gone through the Brit Milah. And the same thing applies to Rambam. It says, if a child was born, and you notice that his body was as if it was already circumcised. On the eighth day, we do this symbolic Brit Milah, which is called Atafas Dam, of taking a drop of blood. Androgynous, we've already learned about it a number of times about an androgynous is a child. His child is born with both male and female genital organs. So you have to circumcise him on the eighth day because perhaps he's a male and he's obligated. Someone who's born by C-section, or someone who has two foreskins, he has to also be circumcised on the eighth day. A C-section doesn't change anything regarding circumcision. It does change regarding Pidyon Aben, regarding the redeeming of the first child, which we're not learning about here. So I believe the Rambam may have put that in there just to say it may apply to some halachas when they're born, but it doesn't apply here. Chet, the eighth halacha. A Brit Milah can only take place during the day, after the sun rises in the morning. Whether it's on the eighth day or whether you give me a circumcision on the ninth day or further. There are legitimate times when you have to postpone circumcision. Some we'll talk about in a moment. Or if the person didn't legitimately, just didn't do it, either way, it has to always take place during the day. Shenema, because it says in the verse, Bayom Hashmini, on the eighth day, Bayom Velo Balayla, during the day and not during the night. If you did give a Brit Milah circumcision from dawn, so you said earlier, Alot HaShemesh, from like sunrise. Now he's saying from the beginning of the dawn. There's two times in halacha, we spoke about this during the laws of Tefillah, of when the day starts. And there's sort of a debate which is the right one. So we technically do everything after the second one, when everyone agrees it's day for sure. But there are times when if you did something after the first one, it still is considered done because it is day. So therefore, Mishala Muda Shachar Kasher, V'chal Kasher Milah, all day is kosher for Brit Milah. And I can just tell you from personal experience, some of my children's Brit Milahs happened all the way at the end of the day, practically the day was over, and we almost ran into some issue in timing. That personally is because we were using a Moel who's been in my family Moel for many, many years. And we brought him from New York, and he's so famous and well known. He traveled to 3 or 4 different states doing Brit Milahs that day, and we ended up being the last, so he came here late. But technically, it can be done anytime during the day, as long as during the day. But Alpha became nonetheless, and this is what you see in every show, mitzvah lahakti b'tchilas hayom. The mitzvah, the preferred way to do it is right away at the beginning of the day. Shez rizin makdiming lemitzvos. Because as reason, those who are pious, those who are proper, fulfill a mitzvah right away, which means you wake up in the morning and you do the Brit Milah, you don't postpone it during the day. Our situation, we were waiting for a particular Moel, so we postponed it. If we were not waiting for that Moel, we would have done something else. We would have done it in the morning. Test number 9. Milah bizmana docha b'Shabbos. Milah on the 8th day in its proper time will override Shabbat. Technically, you're not allowed to cause blood on Shabbat. You're not allowed to harm someone in certain ways on Shabbat. And a Brit Milah does that. Nonetheless, if it's the proper time, and the verse says on that day, you do it on that day, even on Shabbat. But Shalei Bizmana Einu Derech Lo Yetze Shabbat V'Lo Yetze Yom Tov. And if it's not on the proper time, the 9th day, the 10th day, etc., then you don't have the verse telling you that you could override Shabbat, and therefore it does not supersede Shabbat or holidays. The Rambam now continues the interesting footnote here. Saraz is a kind of leprosy. It's not leprosy like we know today. It was more of a biblical leprosy. And if a biblical leprosy came on a person's body, there's a commandment that they should not cut it off from the body. You have to cut it, have to look at it. It's an entire process of purification. We learned about this in Vayikra in the book of Leviticus. What happens if you happen to have that growth of that leprosy, that saras, on the place of the Brit Milah? So the Rambam continues Ketzad. If there's a baheres, the sign of sarat or the foreskin, you can cut it off together with the arla, together with the foreskin. Avapi even though cutting off the taras is a negative prohibition, so why are you allowed to do it? because it's a classic Jewish principle in halacha, classic principle in halacha, that yavo essay v'yidcha et los essay. A positive command can always supersede a negative command. In other words, you have a positive command to give the Brit Milah to the child. Then there's a negative command not to cut off the tzaraat. Which takes preference? The positive one, because it says do it. You do it, even though the other one says you shouldn't do it. Yud 10. Shem Shemilas Abadim Dorchas Shabbos Kach Milas Avadim Shem Nimolim Lishmona Dorchas Shabbos. Just like the laws of Brit Milah for the proper time will supersede Shabbat, so too the laws of an Eved, of the servant, which we were reading before, when he gets his Brit Milah on the 8th day, as we read before, that sometimes the 8th day, sometimes immediately. When he gets that, if the 8th day of this servant, this child who was born, the servant who needs to get a Brit Milah, is on Shabbat, you could also do it on Shabbat. The only exception to this rule is the child who was born to the Jewish household, but his mother only began this process of her conversion-ish process through going to the mikvah after the child was born. So if you remember, we said before that if she doesn't go through this process, then you do it immediately because the child's not considered born to the household. But if she goes to the mikvah after the child's born, then you can also go to the 8th day. But here, you do not supersede Shabbat. Shabbat. And the commentators try to understand why this exception is at play in this particular scenario. Yud Aleph 11. If a child is born already with a Brit Milah, circumcised, or a child who's born in the 8th month of pregnancy before he's continued or completed his growth. We're going to talk more about this in one moment, so let's just keep going here. The child born in the 8th month who has not completed his growth is considered like a stillborn, and he won't live. Again, we're going to get to that momentarily. Or another scenario, Yotzidofin, someone who was born by C-section, or androgynous, or someone who has two, both male and female genital organs. So someone who has two arels, two foreskins. These cases, you're not doich Shabbos, you do not supersede Shabbat. But you do it on Sunday, which is the 9th day for the child. And the Rambam commentators explain because all of these have a certain element of doubt, and because of the element of doubt, we do not want to supersede Shabbat. To supersede Shabbat, you need absolute clarity. Otherwise, you're perhaps risking violating Shabbat. Yud Beis. Mishanola ben Hashmashos. If a child was born ben Hashmashos. Ben Hashmashos is translated as a twilight zone. Again, at the end of the day, there's also a time which we're not sure if the day ends at this time or a little bit later. So the time between those two times is neither day nor night. If you look at the Shabbat always begins about a half an hour to an hour before Shabbat ends. Why? Because in the beginning of Shabbat, we don't know of that time period. Let's say 6 to 6:30. Let's just say for argument, 6:30 is definitely night. 6 o'clock, 5:59 is definitely day. But between 6 and 6:30, we don't know. So Friday, I want to stop doing anything that would violate Shabbat at 6 o'clock because maybe Shabbat begins at 6 o'clock. Saturday, when Shabbat ends, I don't want to start doing things that might violate Shabbat until 6:30, until it definitely ends. So that ben hashmashos. And what if a child is born at 6:15, between the 6 and the 6:30? Is it day? Is it night? How do you count the 8th day? How do you count the 8th day for it? Brit Milah. So the Rambam continues, Moni min alayla v'nimol l'chi. We count from the night, and he's given his Brit Milah on the 9th day. Shehu Safik Shmini, because it's a doubt. So therefore, we don't know if he's born on the day or on the night. So we count it from the night, and it'll be on technically the 9th day, perhaps, which is a questionable 8th. V'im nolan erev Shabbos, he's a fasting halach. If he was born on Friday at 6:15, ben hashmashos, between these two times, ein it doches Shabbat. He can't have his Brit Milah on Shabbat. Why? Because it's a doubt. Maybe he wasn't born on Shabbat, he's born on Friday. And we learned earlier that a milah shelo bizmana, a milah A circumcision not at the proper time does not supersede Shabbat. Therefore, you don't know what to do. And therefore, he pushes it off till Sunday. If we get to a chance later on after this halacha and another halacha, I'll ask you a famous Jewish trivia halachic question after we finish the chapter. So we can put that in the back of your mind if you wish. But practically, this does happen many times, that a child could be born in this twilight zone. And if it's Friday, you will not do the Brit Milah the next Shabbat. You postpone until Sunday. Mishnah Yud Gimel 13. Now we're going to talk about this 8th month child. Halacha has this fascinating situation where in the Gemara has a lot of commentary about it, trying to understand this and how it applies both then and now. That if a child is born during the 8th month, let's read through 13 and then we'll talk about it. If he was complete with his hair and with his nails, then he's a complete child. Uven Shivahu Elishinishta. So really, he was going to be born in the 7th month, but he was delayed and schlepped. He came in the 8th month. And you're allowed to carry him on Shabbat, and he's not like a stone, which in other words, he's not muksa. You can give him his bris milah on Shabbos. But if he was born and his hair, the hair and the nails are not completely formed yet, you look at the child and say, this child was born prematurely. He's like an 8th month old child. So he was really supposed to be born in the 9th month, and he came out early. So therefore, he is considered muksa in a certain sense. Again, I'm going to come back to this in 1 second. Let's just finish the next 4 lines. Nonetheless, if this child, even though we look at him saying this child is not going to live it out, but he lasts 30 days, then harehu kishar hanoldi lechaldav, like any other child is born. Once he passed that 30-day mark, we know he's a living child and there's no issues anymore. Anyone who lasts 30 days is considered not a stillborn. And that's why Pidyon Aben waits 30 days, interestingly, because you want to make sure the child's not a stillborn, the child has survived that month, and then the Kohen comes, takes his money, and does the whole process. Okay. In short, the story is the following. The Gemara seems to imply that a child could be born in the 7th month in a healthy way, or the 9th month in a healthy way. So a child born in the 8th month is either an extension of the 7th or premature of the 9th. But a child who we know is born in the 8th because he doesn't look complete means he's really premature to the 9th. The Gemara says that child won't survive because he's not completely finished. He hasn't grown into himself properly yet to be born. But a child born in the 7th will look completed, would look fine, it would not be a problem. Even as far back as the time of the Gemara. Not quite as far back as the Gemara, but the commentators on the Gemara, Tosfos, the other Rishonim going back, have already said that this doesn't necessarily apply in practical because we don't know the difference. We don't know exactly what it means. Hair is completed, nails are completed, not complete. So we would never not treat that child like a regular child. Even in a time when there was an opinion that you treated the child like the child was muksa, a mother could still lean over and nurse and feed the child because we don't obviously kill a child. The question was, what else can we do with this child at that point? Nowadays, like Tosfos and going further, practical halacha is we don't really apply this distinction of an 8th month old baby. We consider all babies to be the same and we treat them the same. They're not muksa, we take care of them. If they look healthy enough, we give them the brit milah, etc. Especially with the modern medications we have, where a child could be born premature and live a very, very long, healthy life because we know how to take care of them. Besides the fact, kind of as a footnote, often a premature child will not be given the brit milah on the 8th day in any event because a doctor and a moel in conversation might say, let's let the child grow a little bit more and become a little bit stronger. But in any event, it's constantly repeated in halacha, this 8th month child being muksa and being a stillborn, but practically speaking, even going back thousands of years of commentary, we didn't know what that meant, and we do not apply it, and today for sure not with modern medicine in any event. So it doesn't really apply, although it's here. Yudalit. Misha Nola, the Rambam continues on this conversation a little bit more. If someone is born in the 7th month, in Halacha 14, Le'iburo, to pregnancy, if he looks like he was born completed, if you wish, like the hair, the nails, etc., then he's a regular child, and you can give a Brit Milah on Shabbat. Safik ben Shiva, Safik ben Shmona. If it's a doubt if it's the 7th or the 8th, Malin also Shabbat, then we do give him a circumcision Shabbat, I'll call upon him, and they wait. Even Shivahu, the Rambam explains why. What are we doing? If he's the 7th, if he's born in the 7th month, he's going to be healthy. He's a regular child. He has his circumcision on the 8th day. If he's a 9th month born child who might not live according to that thought process from the days of before the Rabbah in the Gemara, then mechatech pasu, then you're anyways not really giving a brit milah to a child, and therefore you're not desecrating Shabbat. Because the child will not survive, is what the Gemara said then. As I said, even already back then, that was called into doubt, and it definitely doesn't apply today. Tezvav. Haitzi ha'uber raishei chutz l'mei ben hashmashes, if the child stuck out its head from the mother's womb during the 6 to 6:30 Ben Hashmasha's time period, this twilight zone, even though the rest of labor took time and the child was not born until on Shabbat, nonetheless, you do not do the Brit Milah on Shabbat since the delivery began in this time zone of suffix, of doubt, we postponed it. Anyone who does not supersede a Brit Milah does not supersede Shabbat, also does not supersede the first day of a holiday, but does supersede the second day. Without getting into long details for the moment, the second day is a doubtful day. We don't know for sure when the first day was, because back in the day, all right, we weren't sure. We learned this in Kiddush HaChodesh. We weren't sure exactly when the Rosh Chodesh is 1 day or 2 days, which is why today we're in the second day of Rosh Chodesh, ironically, as we're talking about this. Some months have 1 day, some months have 2 days. But the moral of the story was we weren't sure when Rosh Chodesh was, we wouldn't know for sure when a holiday was, so we gave it an extra day. Israel didn't have that issue till today. Israel is 1 Seder, 1 night of Pesach. We have 2 Seders, 2 nights of Pesach outside of Israel. And we have an extra day because we go further out of doubt. So the Rambam says that you cannot supersede the first day, which is an absolute, but you can supersede the second day, which is in doubt. But the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are different. They're considered one long day, and that was because even in Israel, there was a doubt because they could not send out messengers because the first day is the holiday. Unlike Passover and Sukkot, which is the 15th day, so they had a chance to get messengers all around Israel. Even in Israel, it was sometimes a doubt. So Israel considers Rosh Hashanah 2 days till today, and therefore it's a little different halacha. And therefore a milah, not in the circumcision, not in the proper time, on the 8th day, also will not supersede the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Tezayin. Now we start talking about a child who's not well. A child who's sick cannot be given circumcision until they heal. And from the time the child is well, and the doctor says, now the child is healthy, then you count 7 days and then give the Brit Milah. When does this apply, this idea? When he had a fever. There are other similar illnesses. In other words, an illness that affects the entirety of the child's body. But once he had an eye ache, an eye issue. The moment the eye opened and the doctor says, okay, the eye is fine, then you give the Brit Milah right away because it's not affecting the need for the body to recoup because it was just the eye. Anything similar. We're going to go to the next two and then we're going to make a kind of a statement about this. But a child whose complexion on the 8th day was very yellowish, or as we call it today, jaundice. In Malanes Shipul by Dam, Vyachsumar Kamara Aktanam Abrim, we do not give him Brit Milah circumcision until his complexion recovers and he looks the same as any healthy child. Interesting. These discussions you have with your Moel in concert with your doctor, because both of them are the experts on when this is. And the Moel talks to the doctor. If the doctor says the child's not healthy, you don't do it. If the Moel says, I'm a little concerned, I want to wait, you might wait. But they have that conversation. Jaundice, many apply from the way the Rambam puts this here, and practically that you don't need to wait 7 days, which means that if on the 7th day the child still has a high level of bilirubin of jaundice, etc., but then it comes down on the 8th day to a safe level, then you could do the Brit Milah on the 8th day. You don't have to wait to 7. But again, that's a discussion between a mom and a doctor to make sure that the child's health, as we'll see in the next line. So if the child was very red in complexion, as if somebody painted it, the Rambam says. Which means his blood is still flowing throughout his body in an unhealthy way. And bear in mind, by the way, the Rambam was a doctor. He was a physician to the Sultan and to others. So he's not just repeating words that he heard. He actually understands the medical side, at least at that time, the medical knowledge of what he's writing about. So if the blood seems to be everywhere, you need to wait till the blood goes back into its proper places and leaves. And because this is also an illness, Rama writes. And here's what I'm saying, the final statement on this, and we must be very careful about these things. Clearly, life supersedes a Brit Milah. So you need to be very careful to make sure that the doctors and the mothers and everyone on the same page say this child is completely healthy and there's no medical issues for this child to have a Brit Milah. And if there is a medical issue, we need to deal with it. Whether you heal just that, whether you heal the entire body, whether it's 1 day, 7 days you wait, etc., will all depend on the circumstances. Yutches 18. Isha Shemala ben Rishon Umeis Machmas Milah. Lady had a child. First child was born. She gave him a Brit Milah circumcision. Shechshilas koiche, and the circumcision took away his strength, weakened the child, and the child passed away. Same thing happened to her second child. Tragedy. The first child, second child, he gave a circumcision, and they both passed away. Baby baila risha, baby baila sheni, whether it was all from one husband or 2 husbands, doesn't matter. You should not, the Rambam writes, give a circumcision to the third child she has in the proper time. You need to wait until the child grows older, and becomes strong and healthy. In other words, if 2 children or one mother passes away, we think because of Brit Milah, the third child is not obligated to go have a Brit Milah until much later in life, until we're completely sure we're out of any danger. In Malin of Lache, we will only circumcise a child who has no doubt that he has no illness. Because sakanas, as we said before, life takes precedence over everything else. And you can always, Rambam writes, do a circumcision later on. But you can never return a lost Jewish soul forever. So therefore, err on the side of doubt. And if the doctor or the male are at any point in any doubt here and think that perhaps the child is not healthy enough, postpone the Brit Milah to a later time. So with that, we finish Perek Aleph.